Okay, our last section here, the market system, which is pretty important to any economy, but especially ours. So we have two key groups here. Households, and households provide what we call the factors of production. Now, in the olden days, we called it land, labor, and capital. Now, most of the time, we don't call that land, we call it natural resources, which is really anything, the land or anything that came from the land. So this would be anything that we grow, lumber, ore, crude oil, all that kind of stuff. So anything, that came, any raw inputs that came from the earth, essentially. Labor, obviously we know what labor is, right? That's the people that are working to turn those natural resources into some sort of finished product. And capital is anything that was produced to make one of the other two more productive. So this is the factory, this is the technology, this is the machinery and equipment. So somebody produced it in order to make the other ones more productive. A good example would be if you look at copies, okay, producing copies. Like in the olden days, monks had to copy stuff by hand, right? And it would take forever. And then the printing press was developed, which means you could produce a whole lot more in a day. And then word processors, or then, think about typewriters to word processors, how much more output you can get. You guys know what a typewriter is, right? How much more output you can get from the same amount of input. So that capital makes the other things more productive. You can use less, you have less waste in your natural resources, so you can get more product out of them, that sort of thing. So the households provide those. The householders own the land, provide the labor, and can produce the capital. Firms are the other key group here, and these guys operate in the product market, the households, or the factor market, sorry, and the firms operate in the product market. So they buy these factors of productions from the households, they turn around and produce goods and services that they turn around and sell back to the households. So it creates this circular flow, all right? Here's your households, here's your firms. So your firms purchase the factors of production. So the households provide the factors of production, the land, labor, and capital. And in exchange for those, the firms pay them, all right? So wages, rent, that kind of stuff. So think, you could focus on labor to keep it simple. The households provide the labor, and then they turn around and get paid for it. The firms take that labor and those other factors and produce goods and services. And the households turn around and buy those goods and services. So the firms pay the households, and then the households pay the firms. And it might not be the same firms, right? So HCC pays me, and I use that money, and I might not spend it at HCC, but I might spend it at the grocery store where you work. And so for me, HCC is on this side of it, and for you, the grocery store is on this side of it, and then we flip. So we have a couple important things here. One is that the money's going to keep circulating. So if a firm gets bigger because more people are buying their stuff, that just means they're going to employ more people and purchase more resources, which means that's more money flowing back to the households. And if the households get more money, that's more money flowing into the firms, which are then going to use that to provide jobs. So it just keeps circulating. So, I know a lot of people are kind of against big businesses, but they provide a lot of jobs and they purchase a lot of resources, whether it's, paper products or computer products, whatever they're doing. It's not just the labor, it's all the other businesses that they're supporting when they're doing that. So it just keeps flowing around. The only difference there would be exports and imports. So when we import stuff, that's money going out, right? The money's going to a firm that's not in the U.S. When we export, there's money coming in, right? And so it's not going to a person here, but it's coming in. And so since we import more than we export, that's a little kind of a drain on this, but it's pretty small compared to, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, it's pretty small compared to the big picture. The other thing you have in here is you have banks, which take money from both, people. If you put your money in the bank in a savings account, a checking account, they take money from both, and then they turn around and they loan that back out to other households and firms. So they're really just redistributing it in here. I mean, obviously they take their cut because they need to pay their employees and all that, but for the most part, they're just kind of rearranging that. And you get the same thing with the government. The government takes from both groups in the form of taxes, and then they turn around and they spend it on the people. The government is not supposed to be making money. The government is supposed to be collecting the taxes and then spending it on goods and services for their citizens, and that includes the firms. And so again, they're just kind of redistributing it. So if I take taxes from the wealthy and use that to provide programs for the poor, I'm just kind of redistributing that in there. So that's our circular flow diagram. We talked in the last chapter about free market versus centrally planned, and we can see a free market is one where there's few government restrictions. So ultimately, it's the buyers and the sellers who decide those three key decisions, right? So the buyers and the sellers, not the government, are deciding what's going to be produced, how it's going to be produced, and who's going to get it. These countries have come the closest. The countries that come closest are more successful than centrally planned in raising the standard of living. So that's really how we measure this. Not that this country is richer than others, but what's the standard of living? And we look at all kinds of things in there, like life expectancy and the number of people that can read and the number of people that have access to clean water and sanitation and all those types of things. And so we want a higher standard of living. That should be the goal of our economy, is to make the citizens in that economy better off. So standard of living is a really important thing, and we see higher standard of living in general in countries with free market. The closer you get to the planned economy, the slower that rise in the standard of living in general. This is not a new thing. Adam Smith is considered the father of economics, and he wasn't an economist. He started in 1776, and he wrote this book called An Inquiry into the Nation and Causes of Wealth of Nations, generally just referred to as The Wealth of Nations. And he was actually a social scientist, like a sociologist kind of a thing, is what he started out studying, but he was looking at how people allocate their resource. And he came up with a couple key ideas that are still very, very relevant today. One is that individuals act in their own rational self-interest. That does not mean that people are selfish, although sometimes it does, but basically it means they're not going to engage in a transaction unless it makes them better off. They're not going to pay more for something than they think it's worth. And it also means that they are going to allocate their resources, their time and their money, in a way that gives them the most bang for their buck. So they're going to work a job that's going to pay them the most if money is their main concern, or that gives them the most flexibility if time is their concern. So they're gonna allocate their resources in the way that's going to yield them the greatest benefit. That's what we mean when we say people are rational. We also see that firms with flexible prices allow the goods and services, I mean the buyers and the sellers here, the households and the firms, to signal. So if people value something, they're willing to pay more for it. That's what we mean when we say how it's going to be produced. If people want organic, then they're willing to pay more for organic, and that's how the produce will be produced. If they're not willing to pay for it, then it's not going to happen that way. And so what we see is this concept of the invisible hand. The invisible hand says nobody has to, if everybody just pursues their own rational self-interest and we have flexible prices, then the stuff that people want is going to be produced. The stuff that people don't want isn't going to be produced. And this is all going to happen without, it doesn't need to be planned by some central authority. There's an invisible hand just kind of guiding this, and all the resources will almost magically get to their most efficient use if we just back off and let this happen. So one of Adam Smith's quotes was, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher or the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest," which means the brewer is not making beer because he wants me to be happy. The brewer is making beer because that right now is the best use of his resource, his time and his talents. That's what's going to yield him the greatest benefit. Because he is producing what I want, he's going to make money by doing that. And the same thing with the baker. He's not baking bread because he wants me to be happy. He's baking bread because he can make money doing it. And right now, that's the best use of his resource. That's going to yield him the highest income. If we look at this whole rational self-interest idea, if we look at a farmer who's looking to expand, okay? So he wants to increase the size of his farm so he can produce more. Why is he doing that? He's doing that to increase his profit. He's not doing it necessarily because he wants to feed more people, but yet he will feed more people. So by pursuing his own self-interest, by expanding his farm to increase his profit, he's going to provide more food for people, assuming he's growing stuff that people want. He's also going to provide more jobs because he's going to have to hire more people to work the increased farm. So everybody benefits by this. He benefits from more profit. More people have food that they want. More people have jobs. So it creates this cycle. And so that's what we mean. This invisible hand makes that happen. There's a very famous essay called I Pencil, all right? And in this book, they kind of changed it to an iPad. But how do you make an iPad? It involves so many people all over the globe that even if, and a lot of them probably don't even know. Like, I'm making some, little techie piece in Taiwan, and I don't know what it's going to be used for. I just know right now this is the job that's paying me the best because there's a demand for that. And so I make these little circuits or whatever, and I don't even know where it goes after this, and I really don't care because right now this is the job that's paying me the most. Even if you had all the ingredients, you couldn't make one yourself. So there's an essay here called I Pencil, and this is a lovely little video representation of it. And I'm going to put a link to that on D2L for you. But really why? Because I think it does a better job than I do of describing this invisible hand and how it's really pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. And it takes something as simple as a pencil, a wooden pencil, and says, it's so complicated how this is made and how there are components all over the world, but no one person has to sit down and plan it all out. Because there's a demand for it, the resources will get to where they need to be. So take a look at that link that I'll put on D2L with this little video of the iPencil. It's a really good one. And there's two more things to kind of talk about in the market system. The first is the role of the entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is somebody who brings together the factors of production in a new way to produce goods and services. They see a need and they fill it. So it could be a new product, it could be a new service, it could just be a new way of doing things, a new production method or inventory method. So it doesn't have to be a new product, but it's somebody who takes a risk and brings these factors of production together in a new way to fill a need. And so they create things sometimes that people didn't even know they wanted. Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, and they would not have said a car because they didn't even know it existed. So these are people who think outside the box, but they are really, really driving the economic growth in any economy. Every big company started as a small company. It started with an entrepreneur. So if you look at Apple, if you look at Facebook, if you look at any of these companies, you see all these ones, they started in a garage, right? They all started as something new, and they were all started by entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs are what drives our economy. They're doing it, most of them are doing it for the profit. But in doing so, they're meeting the needs of the customers. If I come up with something new and nobody wants it, I'm not going to make any money. So I have to figure out what people really want, and I have to provide it, and I see a need, and I fill it, and the small business then grows into a bigger business, and that's really what drives our whole economy. So entrepreneurs are really, really key. And in that way, we need a system that, if we want economic growth, we need a system that encourages entrepreneurs. So even in a free market, we said a free market is very little government, but there still has to be some government. So in a free market, the government is not making the decisions. The government more takes the role of a referee. So they have to protect private property, and they have to enforce contracts and property rights. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm taking a risk, I need to know that the people I made contracts with are going to fulfill them, because if they don't, I can't provide what I promised, and then I look bad and it doesn't work. So it's really kind of a referee hole for, that if I come up with an idea and I have a patent or a trademark on it, I'm the one that benefits. So the government has to protect those, so intellectual property as well. And the government has to enforce the contracts and the property rights. So we have to have so they're the referee. They're making sure everybody's playing by the rules. This enforcement of the rules is what makes people willing to take on that risk. So it makes those entrepreneurs willing to take on that risk because they know that their rights will be protected in this system. If that's not in place, then people aren't willing to take that risk. We don't have the entrepreneurs. It slows down the economic growth, which in turn slows down the raise of the standard of living. So the standard of living isn't going to grow because the economy's not growing. And so that's why that's a really important role. So even though they're not making the decisions, they still play a very important role. So that's chapter 2. Let me know if you have any questions.